my story is not unique. This is just happening all over the country in thousands and thousands of households. And in the 2 weeks since the story has come out, I've gotten like 500 plus emails and DMs, all from people who are I'm going through the exact same thing. Like, my story is the exact same as yours. My father or my mother believe the exact same things. And it's overwhelming to see how many people are wrestling with the same thing.
Zack Mack, welcome to Offline.
Hey, thanks for having me, John.
So we've done a few episodes on conspiracy theories. Your story is different and personal. You have a series called Alternate Realities on NPR's Embedded podcast that's about a $10,000 bet that you made with your dad. What was the bet?
The bet was, so my father has just been getting increasingly into conspiracies over the years. A year ago, I tried to confront him about it. I work in media. And I said, hey, I work in media. I know where this is going. You're being radicalized. Let me help you out. He didn't agree. So he challenged me to a bet for $10,000 that 10 predictions of his would happen by the end of the year. And it was all very politically apocalyptic predictions. It was our country would come under martial law, that an electromagnetic pulse device would wipe out all digital communication across the U.S., that Obama and Pelosi and Biden and all these top Democrats would be rounded up and convicted of treason, and Trump would be reinstated without an election. Like, it was just, all this sort of right-wing fantasy. And of course, at the end of the year, none of it came true. And he was 0 for 10 on his bet.
I'm curious to know what your initial conversation with your dad was like before you started recording your phone calls and check-ins, which become the basis for the series for people who haven't listened.
Right.
Like, where you asked him to participate in this project. Also, you talked to your mother, you talked to your sister, because this has been a if people haven't heard it yet, it's become a family issue. So how did those conversations go?
Yeah, I mean, these conversations have been happening kind of slowly over several years, right? It's like he's talking about conspiracies all the time. We're getting into it and having circular arguments that just aren't going anywhere. They're not working. He's not listening. I'm not listening. And we're just kind of feuding. And really, 2 years ago, my sister came out to my father. My father's deeply religious. He's very Christian. But my mom, my sister, and I are not. And my mom's like a left-wing liberal Jewish woman. We live in the Bay Area. We grew up in the Bay Area. So it's very left-wing. My father's very much an odd man out in a lot of circles, including our close family dynamic. And when my sister came out to him, that didn't go particularly well. And that was like a real fissure in the family. And so we've sort of been dealing with that the last 2 years. And then a year ago, the conspiracy stuff had just really ramped up. And that's when he challenged me to the bet. And the moment he challenged me to the bet, I was like, well, this is obviously a podcast. Like, I just knew, it's like I do this for a living. It had all the things.
Yeah.
Exactly. It had all the things. Like, there were stakes, there were character. He gave me a deadline, and it was just all these things. And I said to him as soon as he proposed it, I was like, hey, do you mind if I interview you? Before I even talked to him about the bet, because first he just sent it to me. He sent like a photo of his predictions. And I said, hey, can we talk about this? But I want to interview you, and maybe I'll do something with it. And he was like, absolutely. That's a great idea. He was really into it.
Okay.
He thought he was going to be right. But so, it's to be fair. But he was very into it and supportive of the idea the whole way. And I think my mom and sister were also involved and supportive, because I think they just felt like we had tried everything else. We had tried to talk to him every other way. So this sort of felt like a Hail Mary pass at the end of the game. It was like one last, weird attempt to get through to him.
So there's a lot of different theories on why people end up gravitating towards conspiracies: media diet, social connections or lack thereof, mental health, personality, upbringing. Why do you think your dad gravitated toward conspiracies, and What do you think made it kicked it up a notch over the last year or two?
I think my father has some clear disadvantages and why he is predisposed to conspiracies being appealing to him. I think one, he really struggles to navigate the internet. Tech and all that is a very foreign concept to him. He doesn't follow the news particularly closely. He's deeply religious. I also think when you are deeply religious, you're sort of trained to take a lot on faith and what you feel is true. His father was an anti-vaxxer. He was a chiropractor and very embittered towards the medical institution. So my father sort of grew up pretty anti-institution, especially medical institutions, and anti-vax as well. So like that all plays into it. And I also just think he's a little bit of a contrarian with an ego. And he lives in the Bay Area surrounded by people he disagrees with. And I think that he's sort of carved out that space for himself a little bit. So there's a lot of reasons why I think it appeals to him. And then there's a lot of reasons why it appeals to different people. And I think everyone has a little bit of a different entry point.
Yes. I mean, you talk about how he consumed a lot of content by a woman named Julie Green.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit more about her and the relationship between conspiracy theorists and their sources.
Yeah, so my father, at some point during the pandemic, came to believe in the idea of that God still speaks through intermediaries. God still speaks through prophets. And so he went looking for prophets, and he stumbled upon this woman named Julie Green. And I think she's someone who appealed to him because she, like him, she's from the Midwest, and she's not like really theatrical and big. She's a little more toned down. And he just started watching her, and she is just pumping out all these like big predictions and conspiracies and saying God is, speaking directly through her. And of course she's wrong all the time. She's wrong on these predictions. I think in 2022, she said, Pelosi and Chuck Schumer were going to die that year. She said, King Charles before he was king, was never going to get to be king, and that he would also kill the queen. And she's wrong all the time. But for some reason, she appealed to him, and he started watching her videos. But she's kind of part of this larger movement of online prophets. You see, like these very on the religious right. There's a lot of them. And at some point, my father made a separate bet with my mother and lost that. And once he lost that, the deal was he couldn't watch Julie Green anymore. And what we realized is like, it didn't really matter. Like it wasn't about Julie Green at all. He just moved on to the next online prophet, and there's other ones that he now prefers more than her. So, but it's part of this whole like world, and yeah, it gets pretty nuts.
I know you talk to a lot of experts who study conspiracy theories. Was there anything you learned that surprised you or helped your relationship with your dad?
Yeah, I think because of my media background, because of the work that I do, I always came into it thinking, oh, you just don't have the right information.
Yeah.
Like, let me just get you the right information. Here you go. And you'll be on your way. Like, you just clearly read the wrong thing and we're good. That's just, that's like so far from the truth. That's not what's gonna help him. And I think the more I realized it wasn't about fighting falsehoods with facts or fighting at all, and it was more about being empathetic, being curious, really trying to understand why these ideas were appealing to him and how he got here. And so just taking like a much slower, more curious route was definitely a way where I was able to connect to him and understand him. Ultimately, I wasn't able to change his mind. So I can't say like, oh, here's the formula for how to pull someone out of the rabbit hole. But I still feel like I'm chipping away at him, even though, our bet is over. I still think I'm chipping away at it. But it's what basically every expert told me is that it's really, really difficult to pull someone out of the rabbit hole once they go down it. And if they don't want to come out, they're not going to.
Your point about empathy, I've heard before and thought a lot about. Like, what did you learn when you tried to see things from your dad's perspective and tried to figure out and talk to him about why these ideas are appealing to him?
Yeah, I think conspiracies, in a lot of ways, people just want to feel like the world is really scary and unpredictable right now, right? It's really scary, and all of us want something that feels like a sure thing. We want to be assured in some way. And I think in some ways conspiracies can do that, even though a lot of them are like really scary. There's sort of that knowledge that is there's something very comforting about them. So I started to understand that. I started to understand why these ideas could just be helpful, especially when you felt a little bit like an outcast, maybe in your family or community. It's sort of, they can be a way of elevating your status, right? If you're a little bit of an outcast, well, now suddenly you sort of have access to privileged information. You know something that those other idiots don't know, so you can feel a little better about yourself. There's just so many reasons why these things are appealing, but yeah, I think what I learned in talking to my dad, I think there's just times where he feels really alone. I think there's probably, when we were talking, he had just turned the same age that his father was when his father passed away, and his father passed away very tragically. So, I think he was sort of grappling with some death anxiety. That was something a clinician pointed out to me, was like, I think your father's definitely wrestling with, death anxiety. And he was like, well, how old is he? How old was his father when he died? And I realized, oh my God, they're the same age, But yeah, the empathy route, it helped me connect with him. Ultimately, I didn't change his mind, but I do think I'm sort of paving the road to eventually reach him. Maybe we'll see, but
the one part stuck out at me is I think you asked him why he wanted to do the bet and why he proposed it, and he said to you that in part he wanted you to believe that God was still in control of the world, and that made me, you were just talking about this, but it made me think of, conspiracies are a way to explain the inexplicable, and give us a sense of order in a pretty disordered world. And I did, when I heard him say that about like God is in control, I'm like, oh, that could be at the root of this.
Totally. And I think it's at the root of religion in a lot of ways, right?
Yeah.
It just sort of explains, it snaps everything into place and gives it all a purpose and a reason. And, it's telling you everything is going to be okay. So yeah, I do think that probably plays into it for him, for sure.
At one point, your dad makes the argument that you and the rest of your family are the intolerant ones because he's fine with your views, but you're the ones who aren't fine with his. What was your initial reaction to that when you heard that?
That's one that kind of stumps me to this day, because he's not wrong, right? He's not wrong. I do think we are being intolerant of his views. Now, it's clear that many of his views are incorrect, and we can factually prove that, right? But we are being intolerant of it. I think he is also not realizing the effect that he's causing on his marriage. The fact that my mom feels like she lives in a house with a person she can't share a reality with, and she can't trust, especially with financial decisions, because he's proven that he can go off and make big financial purchases without consulting her that correlate to a lot of these conspiracy theories. And then, meanwhile, my sister feels rejected by him because of her sexuality. So I don't think he's necessarily being as tolerant as he thinks he's being, but I do understand. Like, I think everyone has a threshold for their tolerance and what they're willing to put up with. You know, I still love my father very much, and we will continue to have a relationship, but there's only so close we can be when we are not sharing a reality.
Yeah, that did. It opened something up for me about conspiracies when he said that, because I was like, well, when you think about the conspiracies on the list, right? He probably thinks he's not doing any harm to you by guessing that Barack Obama and Joe Biden are going to be, arrested and convicted of treason, right? Like, that's a guess. It doesn't seem like it's going to harm anyone. No, of course that goes down a path. And then when he was talking about your sister too, and you said, well, she feels rejected by you, and he said, I love your sister. I love her dearly, and I would never. And it was just, it makes me think about like folks on the right who've gone down these rabbit holes, or even some who haven't gone down the rabbit holes that far, and they really do seem to think that we're the intolerant ones. And that they're not wishing anyone harm, even though they have these views that we think are harmful, if not just having them, but like carried out to their logical conclusion.
Yeah. And also, if given the opportunity, I'm sure my father would like vote a lot of rights away from my sister and things like that. Right. So it is harmful. There is action attached to these beliefs. Sometimes, and sometimes not as directly, but
like he doesn't sound like the kind of guy that would like go storm the Capitol.
No,
but the kind of guy who would say, "Oh, of course the election was stolen."
Exactly, and he believes the election was stolen, and he believes, both Obama and Biden are illegitimate presidents for whatever reason. Yeah. At
this point, are you still attempting to convince your dad of anything? What's the relationship like now?
So since the show's come out, he's heard it.
Mm-hmm.
He's actually not upset. He was like, "Oh, I thought it was well done." He knew it was going to be a difficult listen, but he expected that, and he's been like a great sport about it, very supportive. We've checked in a number of times. And he did challenge me to another bet.
No way, really?
He challenged me to another bet, which it was very similar. It's $10,000, another new crop of 10 predictions. And the only reason I took it, because I don't want to take advantage and I don't want to keep making podcasts about my family. This was incredibly emotionally difficult for me to make.
Yeah.
But I wanted to do it again because I said to him, okay, I'll take this bet. But at the end, when you've lost again, then I get to control your media diet. Like I get to eliminate stuff that you're watching, and I'll give you like a big list of pre-approved things that you can check out, and we can talk about things, and I'll just be a little more in charge of your media diet. And my reasoning for that was like, well, at that point, if you have lost 20 straight predictions in a row, it would be pretty clear that you're on the wrong track, and maybe I know what I'm talking about. And he was like, yeah, that seems reasonable to me. So
what are some of the good what are some of your favorite new conspiracies that are part of the bet?
So last year was all like a political upheaval, and this year, because Trump is in office, it's all predictions like this and this will all come out. The truth will really come out about the JFK murder,
Epstein
Fauci's
files,
involvement in COVID, and that Barack Obama and Joe Biden are illegitimate presidents, and it's all this like these revelations will come out, and so much so that he's like, you will believe it, Zach, you will believe it. And I was like, okay, I'm not gonna believe it unless one of these like 18 news sources confirms it. And I sent him a list, and I was like, it really has to be confirmed by one of these news sources for me to even entertain it as true.
Do you feel like you're making some? You said that you thought you might be chipping away at this. Do you feel like you're making some progress just in talking about the new bet?
I hope so. I'm not. I think last year I really set out to change his mind. I was really hopeful I could change his mind and pull him away from these conspiracies. At the end of the year, when that didn't happen, I I just came to accept where he's at, and I understand that this is largely up to him. I'll do what I can, but I'm not carrying it the same way that I did last year. But I will say that I knew the story was important to tell anyways, because my story is not unique. This is just happening all over the country in thousands and thousands of households. And in the 2 weeks since this story has come out, I've gotten like 500 plus emails and DMs, all from people who are going, I'm going through the exact same thing. Like, my story is the exact same as yours. My father or my mother believe the exact same things. And it's overwhelming to see how many people are wrestling with the same thing.
Has your story and your father's story taught you anything about the wider effort out there to fight conspiracies right now?
I wish there was a more organized effort and unified effort. Everything feels so fractured, and it doesn't feel like there is a clear consensus on how to get someone out of the rabbit hole. And the clinicians and psychologists and experts and people I spoke to, there are things that are helpful and kind of work, but there's no magic bullet, and that's upsetting. And we're in this weird moment right now where there's just like a war on truth. I mean, you see what's happening. It feels like the truth is more up for grabs than it's ever been, and I just think that's a really tough spot for people to navigate. Even you or I mean, there's a moment in the podcast where I misquote something, where I get something wrong, and I wanted to put that in because it's like, we can be wrong too. It's not that I have all the answers. It's not that we're always right. It's there is just so much garbage and misinformation out there, and not a lot of accountability.
Yeah. And I do think I've come to believe that the fact checking, while important, and it's good to have the truth out there, someone should have the truth out there, that is not the answer to persuading people, and that it is much more down the path of, as much as it's difficult as it may be, and it was very difficult for you, I could tell just hearing the series, empathy and is the route to at least try to put yourself in the other person's shoes and see where they're coming from, and that's much harder than fact checking them. But
it's really hard. It's really hard to be patient, and you hear some people and they just say something and it just seems so outlandish and over the top, and it's hard to have patience for that. But ultimately, these are our family members, these are our friends, these are our colleagues, these are the people we have to share a neighborhood, a country with, and we have to figure it out. And I just don't think that's going to happen yelling and screaming at each other. It's going to happen hopefully through more empathy and productive conversations. Yeah.
Zach, I'm glad you did the series. I know it was difficult for you, but it's an excellent series. Everyone should go listen.
Thank you.
And thanks for joining Offline. Thanks for chatting.
Thanks so much, John. I appreciate it.
Take care.